Welcome to the Awakened Collective, where we explore the topics of love, spiritual consciousness, and our divine purpose on this planet. Join us as we uncover the truth that our thoughts shape our reality. Welcome to the Awakened Collective. I'm Rick Gregory, and it is a pleasure to be with you today. Thank you for joining us. And as always, I want to remind you that you are a divine extension of your Creator's love on this planet by whatever name you choose to call that Creator. You have never been separated from your source, from your Creator. We have never been separated from one another. And because I like analogies, and I've shared this once before, if you can picture an ocean, and an ocean being that source, our Creator, and the little waves that rise up from that ocean, I think of that as like us taking on this form, spiritual beings in this human package, that we're taking on this form and rising up for a period of time. And then eventually, when we've fulfilled our purpose and had our experiences on this planet, and it's time for our bodies to disappear, and we just go off, our waves will go back into that source. We return to love. That is what our source is. We are from love, like a pie. If you are if God were an apple pie, you are a piece of that pie, and that piece of pie is not a cherry piece, it's an apple. We are what we came from, and we are love. I have a very special guest with me this morning, and I'm so excited about this podcast and our conversation that we're going to have. Logan Barone is a best-selling author and a spiritual life coach who underwent a transformative journey from evangelical ministry to spiritual awakening. He now inspires others to embrace their own path of self-discovery and connection to the divine within themselves, beyond the confines of rigid religion and fundamentalism. So I want to welcome you, Logan. So glad to have you here this morning.
Yes, and thank you for having me on, Rick. I've been looking forward to this conversation.
I'm so excited. Logan and I have been in touch, and I've gotten to hear his evolution, story of evolution, of how he was raised and how he's come to think the way he thinks today. And I had planned on having him share that whole story. And then when I sat down to put some notes together and I began to contemplate our time together, I really felt that his messages to the world needed to take center stage this morning. So, Logan, I'm going to ask if you'd start by just briefly sharing your experience with the religion you were raised in and how you came to question what you were being taught.
Sure, absolutely. And yeah, I've gone into detail in my story about my story many times on my YouTube channel and in different interviews on different podcasts. So if you want more of the details and more of a focus on that, it's definitely out there. But to sum it up in a nutshell, I was born Catholic into the Catholic tradition. Everyone I knew was Catholic. And I fell in love with God and Jesus and going to Mass and the sacraments at a very young age. And then when I was around 11, my family left the Catholic Church. We became Protestant, evangelical, and then I fell in love with the Bible. And this was really the first time I had read the Bible and studied the Bible. And by the time I was a senior in high school, I decided I wanted to go into ministry full time and be a pastor. So I joined a pastoral internship and started studying the Bible even more, mainly from an evangelical perspective in college. And then while I was in college, my first year, I started to question some of the different things I had been taught growing up in Catholicism, but also in evangelicalism. And it really started with eschatology, so the study of end times. I had a lot of questions about that, and I wasn't really sold on all of the dogma that was being fed to me about dispensationalism and how all these things that are happening in the world right now are actually things that the Bible was speaking about. And, one of the things that I feel like I've been very intuitive with since a young age is whenever something is told to me or taught to me, like in the form of indoctrination, and there's a fear that arises within me, something deeper within me has known that that can't be the way. So these different stories, these different teachings in eschatology that had to do with fear, which, by the way, when you're believing that Jesus is going to return at any second, and if you're not raptured, you're going to have to go through years of tribulation on earth. That's very fearful. So I lived that way for most of my childhood. And I remember often waking up in the middle of the night and having nightmares about the rapture and the stuff that comes with, end times and all of that. And I'd wake up and I'd go around the house to make sure all my family members were
Yeah.
still there, that they weren't raptured. So anyway, I started questioning all of that seriously from a biblical standpoint while I was in college. And then one thing led to the next. Once I started to question that particular doctrine, then I started questioning the doctrine of hell. How could a God of love, whose mercy endures forever, allow people to go to this place of eternal conscious torment? Then came original sin. Then came the entire narrative of the fall and Jesus being the one and only sacrifice and God needing to sacrifice his son, all of that, everything that comes with that narrative. I questioned all of it. And that eventually led me into more of a mystical Christianity. So I stepped out of fundamentalism, became, I wouldn't consider, I would not have considered myself to be a Christian mystic, but I was into Christian mysticism. Let's say it like that. And that's when I started exploring these concepts like going within and meditation and contemplative prayer. And that led me to see that, okay, whatever it is I'm experiencing within me, it's universal and it's not just for Christians, it's for all people, and anyone can experience this. And God is way bigger than any one religion or one belief structure. And what led me to that conclusion was first and foremost meeting people who were from different traditions, who were having the same kinds of mystical experiences of oneness with God that I was having. But then I actually started reading these different holy books from these other mystical traditions. And what I realized was, yeah, this is something, these experiences are experiences that men and women have been having for thousands of years. Why am I just now finding out about this? So that's what led me to get into what I'm into now. And then I wrote a book. I created a YouTube channel a couple of years ago and just started sharing my story and my new ways of viewing myself, others, God, the world, and everything. And then I started working with people one on one. And my approach, my philosophy with that is, like you mentioned in the introduction, I'm focused on leading people to discover the divine within themselves, for themselves. And I believe that each and every soul is here to walk their own unique path. And that's going to look different for each and every being. And so that's really all I do. I help people, I guide people in discovering that. And for me, meditation has been a very helpful method to teach people how to go within and how to discover their unique divine expression.
When you say that's all you do,
Yeah.
that is huge.
Yeah.
It is huge. And I'm just so appreciative of the work that you do. And this is, and be hearing more of this, but this is Logan's book, The Mystery in You. I
Yep.
highly recommend it. It's a wonderful book. And as Logan shared with me the other day on the phone, even from the time of writing this book, ideas change, we evolve, we learn new things, we experience new things, we see things differently. And I love that. I was thinking, and after he shared that, I've written a lot of songs in my day. And when I look back at those songs, at the time that I was thinking a certain way 20 years ago. And those songs represent that. And it's a good marker to see, where I've come from. and how my thinking has changed. And it wasn't just me making a decision. I'm sure it wasn't for you. I'm going to change the way I think. It's we were almost compelled to investigate and find things, and books would come across our path, and different teachers. And I
Yeah.
love one of the things that, and I've got several of the things that you have put out on your social media, and I want to get into some detail on some of these. So, one of the things you've written, it says, before religious institutions, before doctrine, before commandments, humanity lived without the idea of sin. But then came a system, one that told people they were inherently broken, that they must repent and they must obey to be saved. On another one, you say you don't need to be saved from sin. You need to be freed from the conditioning that says you are a sinner. And on another, you say you were never broken, only told that you were. I'd like you just to talk a little bit about that to the folks that are listening this morning.
Sure. Well, yeah, as I mentioned, when I started my deconstruction journey, it eventually led me to question the entire narrative. And by the way, I'll say this: the thing that has kept me going, the thing that has enabled me to expand my consciousness and see things from a higher perspective has been the approach, the embodiment of curiosity. Never thinking I have it all figured out is, in my opinion, as soon as we think we have it all figured out, we have extremely limited ourselves. And that's when we actually stunt our spiritual growth and growth overall, right? So that's something that I've been very much focused on, and I've had to be honest with myself. So yeah, I've always been someone who's loved asking questions. And when I started questioning the entire narrative of just the fall myth, the garden myth, where it starts off with the first two human beings, eating from a tree they weren't supposed to eat from. And then apparently, because of that, all of humanity is somehow sinful at the core, spiritually sinful, and separated from God. To me, I was like, wait, what? Like, what are we basing this off of? And so I just started really diving into that. And then a big part of my journey, as I mentioned, was studying some of the other traditions. Many of these traditions came well before Christianity. And what I discovered in these traditions, mainly the mystical branches of these traditions, was that they didn't start with original sin. They started with original wholeness or original innocence. And then the question is, well, what about bad things that people do? When do people start acting evil and contrary to love? Well, in these different mystical traditions, what they were saying was that there's this thing called the ego. And the ego is not who you really are. It's a false sense of self. It's who you think you are. It's a mental construct, but it's not who you really are. And who you really are is divine. You're one with God. You're inherently whole. That's who you really are. It's pure beingness. And if you think about it, before we start developing all these different thoughts and concepts and ideas and labels that come with the thinking mind, the dualistic mind, we just exist. And there's this beautiful divine innocence of our existence. And I like to call it pure beingness. And so that's where we actually start. But then the mind comes in, and this is all part of the journey, by the way. So I don't consider it to be something that's bad. A lot of people think the ego is bad. No, it's neutral. But what happens is we develop this egoic sense of self. And I believe that when we're living from this egoic sense of self, we're living unconsciously. We're not living according to our true nature, which is divine, which is unconditional love. And what happens is when we live according to that illusion, we end up doing things that don't align with who we really are, or saying things that don't align with who we really are. And I think that's what many of the different fundamentalist religions have called sin. But what's interesting is, you know, in the Greek New Testament, the word for sin is hamartia, which just means to miss the mark.
Right.
So if you want to use that definition for sin, then that actually aligns quite well with how I'm explaining it through the ego. But again, the ego is not something that we're born with. It's something that is developed. We all have this ego, but the beauty of the spiritual journey is learning how to transcend the ego. However, the way I teach it is this: when you transcend who you think you are and you discover who you really are, while you're still having this human experience, you don't totally exclude the ego. You include it, because now you can live through your ego, and it's your true divine essence living through it. And that's actually how we, I think, experience diversity and uniqueness in this world, in the human experience, and it's integrated into the fullness of our being. So, what I focus on now, mainly as a coach, is explaining and teaching how this whole mindset, this whole identity, this belief that you are a sinner is some kind of subconscious programming that you were either persuaded into, or like me, maybe you were born into a religion that taught you that from the time you were a child. And this subconscious programming, it takes years to fully develop, but ultimately what it does is it controls your life like 95% of the time. So it's not actually sin that you need to be freed from, because again, sin, which is not knowing who you really are and living contrary to the true self, that's something that I think the better way of approaching that, or looking at that, is, yeah, instead of being freed from sin or whatever, you discover who you really are. You discover the true self, and simultaneously, because the true self, metaphorically, we could say, is light, the light of the world. The darkness, the all the different illusory egoic identities and tendencies and roles, all of those things kind of just fade away as the light of our true selves begins to shine. And so what happens there? How do we actually discover who we really are? Well, that goes back to the conditioning, and really going after the root of the subconscious belief that you are a sinner. When you go within and you actually start to reprogram what you believe most about yourself, what you'll notice is you don't have to stop, quote unquote, sinning at that point, because all of a sudden you'll start living in a way that is in alignment with love very naturally and effortlessly, because your belief about yourself has changed. And now that there's a new root in there, we could say, there will inevitably, I can't say it, inevitably be new fruit that's naturally produced. So that's how I frame it up, and that's how I like to teach it.
You know, one of the books that came across my path, and I think I told you I started reading a book called Letting Go by David Hawkins, which you have a copy of, which led me to A Course in Miracles, which challenged everything that I was raised to believe. I mean, I had a spiritual experience at 19 and got very involved in a Pentecostal church, ended up pastoring a Pentecostal church for a number of years. So it was challenging. And at the same time, just reading the words, I knew in my gut that it was true, and that's where we know, in that intuitive place. And a lot of writers I've been reading, they start their writing by saying, "I'm not gonna tell you anything you don't already know." And it's just been covered up. Like you said, as a child, we come here innocent. We are innocent. David Hawkins says it's like we're a brand new computer, and it isn't until we start loading software and
Yeah.
that software has viruses, and that we have the issue. And as kids, we are hungry for information. I mean, my kids were always asking questions, and I, as a broken parent, just relaying information that had been told to me, and that people that told it to me learned it from someone else, never having the thought to evaluate it. Unlike yourself, who at a very young age thought to question, just carried that stuff, and we are conditioned by that. And then we realize, and I've been doing some work with my studio friend here too, in Ascension Leadership Academy, doing some shadow work and looking at, the things that I have believed about myself. And in AA, one of the wonderful things about AA is that we come to understand God as we choose to understand God. And that was, I thought, was just heresy when I came into those rooms. I thought there was one way to understand God, and when I came in, I'm like, "I've got this." I pastored a church, of course I know God. Talk about ego. And coming to realize that I can now understand God the way I choose to understand, and not understand based on someone else's teaching and instruction, is just an amazing, amazing thing. And it, like
Yeah.
you said, it brings freedom, and my life has changed. My decisions are different, because of understanding that truth, that I am loved, I came from love, and I am love.
Yeah.
So, moving on to the next topic, that you wrote, they told you hell is what happens if you fail to believe the right thing, fail to obey, fail to be good enough. But what if the real hell is believing you could ever fail at being what you already are? You are not a test subject in some divine experiment. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, sure. So as I mentioned earlier, deconstructing the belief in some place in the afterlife called hell was a big part of my journey. And what I realized was, while there is not a place in the afterlife called hell for unbelievers, like I had once believed, um, there is a hell that exists here on earth. And that happens when we live according to these different egoic ideas and concepts about ourselves, because it really limits us. It prevents our true divine nature from shining, like I mentioned earlier as well. So, yeah, it's interesting how it works, but there's so many different ways I can approach this and talk about it. But I think ultimately, um, yeah, when you're told that there is something inherently wrong with you and you actually believe that, and it becomes ingrained into your subconscious, then to me, that's really the only hell that there is. But the beauty of it is, it's not eternal, it's not forever. It's actually illusory. And once you actually discover who you are, the light and darkness cannot coexist.
Yeah.
And then you realize that heaven was also within you as well the entire time.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, a lot of people, when I think there's so much conditioning on those two words, heaven and hell, right? And it's always futuristic, it's always in the afterlife. But what I'm learning now is, when you reframe it and you understand that, I think it was Joseph Campbell who once said something like, all the gods, all the heavens, all the hells are within you. Then you realize and you see that, yeah, the kingdom of God truly is within me. And when I choose to embody these divine qualities that are inherent to my being, then I'm transformed from the inside out. And I start to see the kingdom of God all around me. And my outer world really is a reflection of my inner world to a degree. So all these things start to make sense from direct experience. But yeah, that's the way I see it. I think there is no futuristic heaven or hell in the way that we've been taught, like in the sense of some kind of reward or punishment system. I think it's all within you. And depending on your state of consciousness, that's going to determine whether or not you experience heaven or hell
Yeah.
right here, right now on the earth.
And, our thoughts, if we are living with a negative mindset or an egoic mindset, we will, I have found personally that it's very easy to find evidence to support your way of thinking.
Yes.
And when I'm thinking that I am love, I can find evidence to support that as well. So it's
Yeah.
like you see our lives being created by what we believe.
Yeah.
And, I see Jesus transcended every human limitation and taught us how to do the same. And even, with his being tempted, I still hear people that talk about the devil being a being. I don't see that today. I think the devil is my ego. And I
Hmm.
think when those words, when Jesus was confronted with, cast yourself down from me or turn those stones to bread. I mean, he was dealing with an ego as
Yeah.
far as I see it,
Yeah.
um, but transcended it, even to the point of turning the other cheek in the face of the Roman Empire and the religion of the day to crucify him. And one thing I love that is, if there is a sin, wouldn't the greatest sin be the ones who pierced the side of Jesus, who took his life? And what did he say to those people? "Forgive them, Father, they don't know what they're doing." And
Exactly.
Romans talks about the only sin is ignorance. And that's through our conditioning, through, like you said, we come here, we're a spiritual being, and we fall asleep. We become unconscious. And that's okay. That's what I think was supposed to happen, and then we gradually begin to wake up.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's how I see it. Talk to me about non-duality. That's something that was brand new to me when I started this journey. Just the term, and Hawkins is big on it. He's written books on it, but
Sure.
I would like to hear your take on it.
Yep. So, non duality is something that when I got into Christian mysticism and I started reading a lot of the different Christian mystics, what I noticed was uh, after they would have these mystical experiences and they were transformed from the inside out, they were seeing everything from this different perspective. Instead of from this dualistic perspective, they were now seeing it from this non dual perspective, not two, meaning one. And what I noticed was I would have these mystical experiences as I'm like reading the Christian mystics. And that helped me too, knowing that there were other people, other Christians throughout history that were having similar experiences. But what I noticed was in the mystical experiences that I was starting to have, when I would move past my analytical thinking mind and I would go deep in meditation, my sense of being a separate self would dissolve and I would directly experience this oneness. And my mind was trying to understand it. My dualistic mind was trying to make sense of it and interpret it, but it couldn't. So that's why, a lot of the mystics, they say that what they experience in meditation is ineffable. It's beyond words. It truly is. It's beyond any kind of concept or idea or label that the mind loves to come up with. So I started having these experience of just oneness. Like I said, like it was no longer me, this separate entity experiencing the world out there or God up in the sky. Everything was one. And then I started reading some of the different Hindu mystics, and they were talking about it. And of course, they had different words for it. Same thing with the different Buddhist mystics.
Mhm.
And in fact, in Zen Buddhism, there's a saying that they say, and it goes like this. It says, um, um, all of our concepts and ideas and beliefs about the infinite, the ultimate God, whatever you want to call it, are simply just the finger pointing to the moon,
Mm.
but it's not the moon, right? So, yeah, that all started to add up for me. And when I directly experienced it and then I was reading about it, it gave me the confidence and assurance that there's something to this. And then I started reading and studying quantum physics a little bit. And I realized, well, wait, quantum physics is now kind of saying the same thing, that separation is an illusion. And this is, obviously modern science is just now talking about it, or not just now, but it's been some time, but it's somewhat new. But it's not new in these ancient mystical traditions. They've been saying it for thousands of years. But I think the biggest shift, the biggest paradigm shift in this non dual view is understanding what God is, right? Because for most of us who were brought up in any kind of religion or religious fundamentalism, we were kind of programmed to believe that whatever God is something separate. God is a being or a mega being or, some kind of distant deity. And we are these sinners here on earth. We're separate from God, and we need something to happen in order for us to be reconciled or restored back into relationship or union with this mega being up in the clouds. We used to call him the big man upstairs. So what the non-dual approach did for me was it showed me that God is not a being, but being itself. God does not exist. God is existence itself. And going back to quantum physics, it's like, okay, all these different things that we're experiencing through our five senses, and we think that, oh, this is solid objects, all the matter, all the forces of the universe. We think that these things are absolute according to what our finite minds and five senses are telling us. But what quantum physics is showing us is that everything is actually pure energy, vibrating at different frequencies. Nikola Tesla said, if you want to understand the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. So what is that pointing to? What is it showing us? What it's showing us is that the separation that we're perceiving through our finite minds is illusory, and that everything is actually arising, manifesting from this one infinite source of whatever you want to call it, pure energy, infinite consciousness. And there's no separation in this infinite consciousness. So it goes back to what you were saying about the ocean, that analogy, which is a beautiful analogy. And I talk about it all the time, where it's like, okay, the ground of being, God, whatever you want to call it, is the ocean. However, in this ocean, there's all these different waves, unique waves that are manifesting from the one, but the waves are not separate from each other. They're all interconnected. And the wave is still fully the ocean when it's doing its thing. So that's non-duality, I think. Yeah. And I think that analogies and metaphors and myths have done a really good job of pointing to the moon, right? But as soon as we get into literalism, that's when the finite mind, the analytical thinking mind kicks in, and God has to be something outside of ourselves. But this is, I'll say this last thing real quick. One thing that really helped me with non-duality is I've always said that God is infinite, right? And most people that believe in God would say that. Well, yeah, in order for God to be God, God has to be infinite. But that word, infinite, by definition means boundless, which means there's no line that you can draw where you can say, okay, God is this, but God is not that. Mm-hmm. As soon as you do that, you're making God finite. So as soon as you say, okay, God is not within me, or God is not me, God is out there, God is distant, then we're talking about some kind of finite deity.
Yeah. And it takes me back to Genesis, so the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which is duality.
Yeah.
The tree of life, which is non-duality. And, judging always, the good and evil is, we're always in a place of judgment. Whether, good and evil, right and wrong, pretty, ugly, all the opposites.
Yeah.
And that non-duality is just seeing everything as it is.
Yes.
And someone said just recently that really makes sense to me. That babies, when they're born, they sleep so much because of the fact that they were boundless energy.
Yes.
in vibration, and now they've taken up this form, which is at a much lower energy rate,
Yep.
and that's why they I just thought that was interesting,
Wow. Yeah.
why they sleep so much because it's just it takes a minute, you know,
Yeah. Yeah.
to change
Sure.
that. You also said your spiritual path was never meant to look like anyone else's, and I know you've already touched on that. Um, and it makes me think of, I used to be I was guilty of that, and, not the word guilty, but I was wanting everyone to, I was a Bible thumper, when I was, pastoring a
Yeah.
church, wanting everyone to see things the way I saw it,
Yeah.
and realizing today that there's many paths up the mountain, and I was the one that was walking around the mountain telling everyone else that they were on the wrong path, and not on a path at all. Um, Tell me about the next one is our being is God's being. And I think you've touched on that too, that, we are one with God. But is there anything else that you want to share on that? I didn't write too much else other than our being is God's being from your writings.
Yeah, no, I think it's a beautiful revelation. And for me, that was the theology that changed everything. However, what I'll say to that is even what you just said, can become another theology. If
Mhm.
it can become another belief. And I think what ultimately has to happen is that line, what you just said, has to move from being something that you believe in to a direct experience.
Yeah.
Then that's when it becomes life changing. That's when it actually starts to produce fruit in your life that is in alignment with unconditional love, non judgment, the qualities of the divine that you are. So, and for me at least, and this is going to look different for everyone as well, but for me at least, meditation has been the method that I have used to directly experience that. And once you experience it, there's no going back to any kind of separation consciousness. It just, no, there's, once you move past belief and you directly experience and then there's not really a need for belief anymore. And that's why I often say, and I get a lot of different responses from this statement that I like to make, but I say, I don't believe in God. I don't believe in God anymore. And like I said, a lot of people will freak out when I say that. I've even had family members who have called me as soon as I will make a post about that. And they say, well, what do you mean you don't believe in God anymore? We knew you were deconstructing. We knew you were going this path. And it's kind of odd. And we weren't really questioning it. But now, now you don't believe in God anymore? It really scares people. And I say, well, no. Well, yeah, I don't believe in God anymore. But here's why. To me, if God exists, then it's not a matter of belief. It's a matter of knowing. Either God is real and you can know from direct experience, or God is not real. But when I think of belief, I think of like the whole, like Santa Claus, or, well, do you believe in Santa Claus? It just didn't work for me in that avenue of spirituality and my path. So yeah, God's being is your being, or our being is God's being, however you want to say it. Is a direct experience, and it's has nothing to do with believing in something. I think Rumi said one time, he said, I searched for God and found only myself. I searched for myself and found only God. And
Yeah,
that's what it is.
I love that. I do really
Um,
love Rumi as well. Um, so many things are going through my head, as far as what I wanted to share, but one of the you mentioned experience, and that is it is key because, I mean, we've both had on our journeys, we believe things we've been told, and then questioning them and digging and then having an experience, where once you have the experience, that knowing, you don't lose that. And I heard, and I'm sure you've heard this before, but trying to explain an experience to someone, is literally impossible because they get to experience it themselves. And it's like telling someone that's never tasted a mango, what a mango tastes like.
Yeah.
It's impossible. You can
Hmm.
you can try, but until that individual has the experience themselves, there's no way that you can, adequately explain that. Let's
Right.
throw this one in here for fun, but déjà vu
Okay.
is not what you think. I love déjà
Yeah.
vu, and I have it happen pretty frequently.
Hmm. Yeah, that's an interesting one. I think in order to understand deja vu, we have to understand that our perception of time is fundamentally illusory. It's time is relative, it's not absolute, and this is something else that has been. I think it was, I guess Albert Einstein talked about it the most. He really got into it, and when you understand, I think the best way of saying it is this: this is the shift, going from the belief that you are in time, traveling through time, to the reality that time is in you, and that your perception of linear time, past, present, future, is all unfolding in the now.
Mhm.
But linear time is how the finite mind interprets what's going on in this human experience. Okay. But when you transcend that, which, how do you transcend the concept, the construct of time? Well, if time is connected to the finite mind, well, then when you transcend the finite mind through direct experience, then that is when you're in reality, and reality is timelessness. And when that happens, like, all you can see all things happening at once,
Mm.
because that's how all things are happening in the only moment that exists, the eternal now. So, deja vu, what is it? Well, there's different thoughts and theories on it, right? And I've had, like you, I've had many deja vu experiences. And I think something within us knows intuitively, like, okay, yeah, this is something spiritual. This is something different. This is not just like, I don't know if there's some kind of scientific explanation for it, although science will try to explain everything. I don't know, like, the different explanations and theories I've heard from mainly like a scientific point of view don't really sit well with me. But I personally think that there are these moments in our lives when we become really totally absorbed in the present moment, or we're just not in our headspace as much. And during these times when we're fully absorbed in the now, we can actually have these glimpses of what is the timelessness. And sometimes, like, when we're in these moments, which are really mystical experiences in and of themselves, what can happen is, like, the whole construct, the whole illusion of past, present, and future can get kind of mixed up, and we can have some kind of remembrance, is really what it is, of, yes, of course, this is somehow like already happening, or it happened, or it's happening now. But the way I've come to see it from a little bit of a different angle than what I just described is just like synchronicities. These moments of deja vu are almost moments that the higher self or source, whatever you want to call it, is giving us, to kind of give us a little nudge and say, hey, remember, there's a lot more going on to this human experience than you think.
Yes, I love that,
And I've
and I
noticed that for myself, and this isn't always the case, but in many times, the moments in my life when I'm having the most amount of synchronicities or deja vu moments, that's typically when the higher power, the higher source, is encouraging me to keep doing whatever I'm doing, or to keep going down the path that I'm currently walking down. And that resonates with me. It may not resonate with you or anyone else listening, but for me, that's been a very helpful way of looking at it.
it absolutely resonates, and,
Yeah.
Carl Jung's book, Synchronicity or Synchronicities is really good. I'm not all the way through that one yet. It's a little bit
Yeah.
slower read for me, but I enjoy it when those synchronicities happen, and I've had lots of them in my life. This one is gonna get some attention. This next one is there is no second coming of Christ. Christ will return not from the sky, but from within. And I like to say we are the people we've been waiting for because it comes from within. So talk to me about that.
Yeah, well, this is something that many of the Christian mystics talked about. But for me, going back to my time as a Christian, as an evangelical, when I started to really question the eschatology of the Bible, and one of the things that really got my attention, which, I'd read this passage many times, but it took someone else pointing out something in the passage in order for me to see it differently. And that's the Olivet Discourse, Matthew 24, which is, one of the most famous eschatology passages that there are. And what this person showed me was, after all these things that Jesus had talked about and prophesied about in Matthew 24, he looks at his audience, the disciples, and he says, yeah, everything I just said is going to happen in your lifetime. This generation will not pass away before all these things come to pass. And I was like, wait a second. I've been using this passage to talk about what's going to happen, in this time, in this century, or in my future. Well, Jesus just told his audience that all these things were going to happen in the first century, in their generation. And within that was the statement of, you will see the Son of Man coming in the clouds, which is what many interpret as the rapture of the second coming. So there was that. And then in another place, I'm forgetting exactly where it is. I think it's somewhere in Matthew. I think it's Matthew 16, but maybe not. Jesus says something. He tells his disciples, he says, some of you will not taste death before you see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. So there's many different places where, if there is a second coming and you are reading these passages honestly and interpreting them through the lens of how that first century audience would have understood what Jesus was saying at the time, it really does seem like whatever this second coming is, or this appearance is of Christ, it's going to happen in the first century. That's what it seems like. And again, this was one of the main things that started my deconstruction journey, along with other different eschatology interpretations and stuff like that. But what I ultimately realized was, when you look at the Greek of the New Testament, or when you're reading the New Testament in English, so let me say it like this: you see the phrase "second coming" often, right? Second coming is not in the Greek. That phrase, the Greek word that is used, or the Greek word that the translators translated "second coming" from, is the Greek word parousia, which just means presence or appearance. It doesn't mean second coming. It just means what I just said, presence. So then I started thinking, well, wait. And then this goes into understanding that the Christ was not Jesus's last name. The Christ was a title, and there were many Christs throughout time, before Jesus of Nazareth and after, we could say. But so that's important to understand, right? The Christ is not Jesus of Nazareth, the man, by any means, but he took on that title. And so when we start talking about the second coming of Christ, or the return of Christ, and we start wondering, okay, well, what is the Christ? Well, there's different interpretations for that as well. But many of the mystics interpret it to be some kind of universal mind, some kind of universal consciousness that is in alignment with who we really are, the divine within. So I know I'm kind of all over the place, but just hang with me here. So if we're going back and we're reading the different New Testament scriptures, and we're seeing that, okay, it's actually the especially like when Paul talks about it, it's the appearance of Christ, or the presence of Christ. Well, the question is, where is Christ? Well, according to the New Testament scriptures, Colossians, it says, Christ is all and in all. And then it says, Paul says that the mystery that was hidden for ages and generations, but is now being revealed, is that the Christ is within you. So maybe, and again, I'm past the dogma stuff, so I say maybe. I throw this out as a potential. Maybe the second coming or the return of Christ has nothing to do with one man coming back at some future time period. The Bible doesn't even really say that Jesus of Nazareth is coming back in our time, in our future. But what it does say is that the parousia, the presence of Christ, happened. People experienced it in the first century, which would align with, I think, what Jesus was kind of saying, maybe in some of his prophetic messages. It's happening in the first century, and it's been happening since the first century, and it's been happening before the first century, because it's this eternal realization. And by the way, when I say the word eternal, I don't mean a time that starts, that goes on forever and ever and ever. I mean timelessness, going back to the timelessness that I was talking about, the eternal now. So this has been happening for a long time. And every time a person directly experiences the divine within them, and they move from duality to non-duality, and they see everything as one, to me, that is the return of Christ. That is the manifestation of the Christ within each and every soul. So to me, I think that is ultimately the message. That is the gospel, if you want to call it that, that will contribute the most to some kind of real, genuine collective shift in the consciousness of humanity. But as soon as we get into the savior mentality and we think that, oh no, this world is hell, everything's going wrong, and there's this and there's that, and the only fix, the only solution is Jesus of Nazareth, the person who lived in the first century, is going to come back in our day, which, you know, every generation, every like Christian group, for the most part, since the first century, has been believing that Jesus was going to return in their time, in their day. It hasn't happened in the way that they believe. So again, I just think that this is it's a way that resonates with me the most. I'll say it like that.
Yeah. I don't know if you remember, you're no, probably not old enough to remember this book because it came out in the 80s, but it was 88 Reasons for the Return of Jesus in 1988. I don't know if you ever.
Yeah. And then wasn't there a book that came out after that in the next year, 89 Reasons?
I don't know, probably.
Like that?
I don't remember that one. I think I gave up after the 88 because there were folks that, you know, I was with at the time that believed it. People that left their jobs.
Yeah.
And it's, but I loved what you said about consciousness. We have Christ consciousness. And, you know, the Bible tells us that we have the mind of Christ, and it's not the mind of a human being. It's Christ consciousness. Is what's, I think people are beginning to wake up into that place of awareness. Just a few more that every face. And I love this one, and I've done a lot of reading on this, but every face is another version of yourself. We are like mirrors, and that's your statement, and I would add, you know, we are mirrors for each other, or of each other. Talk about that.
Yeah. Well, that really changes the game, because when you move past the ego identity and you realize that who I really am at the core, this original innocence, this pure infinite awareness, is fundamentally one with each and every being, then you see that, okay, there is no more us versus them. There's just us. And to me, that level of consciousness changes how you see everything. And it should cause you to be a more compassionate and loving soul. And it does. It absolutely does. So, yeah, this is something that, again, comes with moving from separation consciousness to unity consciousness. When you see that all the different waves of the ocean are the ocean at the deepest level, then you see that, okay, what I do to others, I'm actually doing to myself. And that's actually where we get this notion of karma. That's the way I view karma. It's a mirror, right? And so, a lot of people are very adamant about, if you don't believe in the Christian narrative of the fall and this and that, and Jesus is the one and only Savior, then you're going to be a sinful person. You're going to live in a way that's contrary to love. Not true.
No.
Not true at all. Because even when I was a Christian, I remember growing up and meeting people who were not Christian, who were a part of different religions, or maybe they were atheist or agnostic. And I used to say, gosh, it just seems like some of these people are some of the most Christ-like people I've ever met.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't believe in my religion. So yeah, it's a bigger perspective, and it's understanding that we all are truly one. And when you start living from unity consciousness, it like I said, it changes everything. And I think that again, this perspective will lead to the ultimate, and maybe not the ultimate because there's so many different layers to it, but it will lead to a major awakening in the collective shift of what's happening right now in this world. And I think it's a very inspiring and hopeful message. And it's something that I think the reason why so many people are drawn to it at this time is because they're realizing, wait, I don't have to like join another religion, or I don't have to believe in this particular creed or doctrine. It's just this simple shift from an outward perspective to an inward perspective, where I'm seeing that, okay, once I transform from the inside out, then I see things differently, and I start living from love. I start living from source, and then the world starts to kind of, in a way, mirror that around me. That's the only thing that this is, and yeah, that's the truth. It's a personal. That's what I always say. It's a personal awakening. It's a personal transformation that leads to something so much bigger than yourself, and it's genuine and real.
Absolutely. And I love the phrase that everyone is our teacher. Everyone we cross paths with. And there's some words in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous that talks about when we are disturbed by some person, place, or thing. That's when it's time for us to take that and look at ourselves, find out what is within us. And it is an inside-out job. Absolutely.
Yeah.
How prayer works scientifically. Mark 11:24. We believe that we have received.
Mm-hmm.
I want to hear about that.
Yeah. I made a YouTube video recently where I talked more about this, but I stopped praying for a while when I got into mysticism and meditation in non-duality, because I was thinking, well, wait, if I'm one with God, if God is everything and nothing, who am I praying to? What's the point in even praying at all? And then I learned that, well, wait, if God is within me and everything is an expression of the divine, and everything is energy and it's vibrating at different frequencies, well, what if the power within me can actually make a difference in the world around me, in the lives of other people around me? And what if there is something to prayer? And then that's when I started. Again, what you'll find is that throughout my journey, there's this pattern of me having these certain experiences that feel unique, but then I go back and I read and I find that someone else has had this experience, because truly there's nothing new under the sun. But what this does is it gives me confidence and assurance that I'm not the only one that is, getting into like weird spiritual stuff. No, this is stuff that's been around forever. So yeah, I read the verse in the Bible that Jesus apparently said in Mark 11:24, Then I read books like The Autobiography of a Yogi, the story of Paramahansa Yogananda. That book helped out a lot with understanding the different types of meditation and prayer and energy and mind and stuff like that. But the way I started to view prayer from this non-dual sense was, instead of trying to contact this deity that's up in the heavens and begging him to do things for me or for other people, I started almost combining meditation with prayer. Okay. And so I would meditate and I'd get into a deep meditative state. I'd get into the theta brainwave state. And when I was in theta, I would start to visualize whatever it was I was wanting to see a change in. Okay. I would see it. I would use the power of my imagination, because that's another thing I didn't really know a whole lot about. But then I started reading Neville Goddard, and Neville Goddard talks about how imagination is one of the most overlooked, underrated aspects of life. It's very divine. It's really where that creative energy comes from.
Yeah.
So I would go into deep meditation. I'd start to see it. I'd start to imagine it. And then I would feel as if I would feel the feeling that was equated to whatever it is I was praying for. Seeing it, what would it be like if that thing was done, if that thing was already a current reality? So let's say, like, the prayer, the thing that I was focusing on or imagining, if the feeling or emotion connected to that was abundance or love or peace, instead of waiting for that thing to show up and manifest in my outer world, I would really embody that emotion in deep meditation while I'm seeing it. And I'm, in this very mystical way, I'm literally treating it like it's a memory or like it's something that's occurring right here,
Oh,
right
yeah.
now.
Yeah.
Then all of a sudden, what I noticed was, as I would maintain that elevated emotion, that state of being, slowly but surely, the prayers would start to, we could say, manifest or be answered. And so, maybe prayer is not the best word for it, because prayer has so much attached and connected to it from the old, like, separation consciousness. But yeah, I mean, for me, that's what was happening in my life. I was reading about it. Other people had been experiencing it, and different teachers, different mystics were maybe using different words for it. But yeah, it gave me a lot of hope. But then the other thing I realized was, with prayer, and this is going to be controversial, so maybe there's going to be people that disagree with me on this. And I used to not believe in this, by the way. But I do think, at this point in my journey, I do think that there are certain things that are destined to happen. I'm not saying every little thing is destined to happen, but I do think that there are certain things that the soul or the higher self has chosen to experience before the incarnation. And it doesn't really matter what you do, how much you pray. Maybe you can postpone it from happening, but it will happen. So I've learned that when I'm really trying to change something or shift something, either in my life or in someone else's life, I always do what I just told you. I get into deep meditation. I go through the imagination, the visualization, and the prayer method and all of that. But if I don't see it moving, then I shift into acceptance and surrender. And I just trust God. I trust the universe. And I believe that whatever's happening is unfolding for the greater good of myself or for that person.
I agree with you. And, we had a podcast once where we went into quite a bit of conversation about having chosen the experiences of our life before landing on this planet.
Yeah.
Our soul contract. And I went back through my life and saw some of the things that I would have considered some of the most painful experiences, and see how they have worked together to bring me to a place where I can where I'm aware of my purpose and I can fulfill my purpose. And I think it was all agreed to, like I said, before I showed up here. Um,
Sure.
so I really like that. Well, in closing, I want to we've been talking about this throughout, experiencing God directly. But I thought maybe in closing, you could just summarize how to experience God directly without religion. And again, we've
Yeah.
been talking about it, but
Sure. Sure. Well, like I said, it's going to look different for each being, but I think ultimately, um, I think it starts with curiosity. I think curiosity is a divine quality that's like imagination has also been overlooked, and there's a lot of misconceptions around it. But curiosity is where the journey starts. When you start to realize that, maybe all these things that I've been believing in are not so true, and you start to ask the bigger questions that no one else around you is asking, what that path, what that journey will eventually lead you into is this space, this emptiness. And then you get to a place where you say, yeah, I don't know. I'm losing hope, or I'm losing confidence in all these things that I thought I knew. And it's a very scary place.
it is.
Many have called it the wilderness season or the dark night of the soul. But you're like, I don't really know anything. And that seems scary at first, but that is actually one of the best places to be in, because you're actually returning, you're remembering
Mhm.
that the only thing you know for sure, and this is not an intellectual knowing that it's an experiential knowing, but the only thing you know for sure is that I exist, awareness of awareness. And in that journey of deconstructing or unlearning or letting go, whatever you want to call it, yeah, you return back to the original innocence, back to the pure beingness. And then from that place, it's all experiential.
Mm.
And I think that, and I hate, and like, I'm not saying that this is what everyone has to do, because it's not. And there's going to be different methods and different ways that people go beyond this point. But like I said earlier, for me, it was meditation. It's not the only method, but it's a really helpful method, in my opinion. You develop a practice where you start going inward, maybe for the first time, and you really start to investigate that I am, that presence, that sense of I am. And then it goes from there. And I don't want to get too much into, okay, well then what happens next after you start to meditate on the
Yeah.
I am? Because I can't.
Yeah.
I really can't. And even for myself, I've said this before, people have asked me to really go into great detail about what happens when I'm having a mystical experience. And I don't, because I don't even really know what's happening. And what I mean by that is I'm aware enough to know that when I'm having a mystical experience, like I said earlier, it's beyond words, it's beyond concepts, ideas, it's beyond my finite mind.
Mm.
And as soon as I, try to interpret the experience through my mind, and then I try to explain it through language, I've already pretty much diminished the core of that experience. And it's not going to be anything close to what it actually was.
That's right.
So that's why I always go back to the spiritual journey is a very personal experience. It's a very individual journey. Yes, there's community. Yes, there's people that help us, that walk with us, that point us to the truth within. But I think you have to maintain that level of intimacy with the divine and with these experiences. And I think that's what really empowers people to live authentically,
Mhm.
to have confidence to live authentically and to allow their unique divine expression to shine in the world. So that's what I would say. But yeah, it's the sequence of start asking questions, be curious, and really rest and embrace in the ground of being the I am. Meditate, find a practice, find some kind of method to explore that with, and see what happens.
See what happens. Thank
Yeah.
you, Logan. And I
Yeah.
have read Neville Goddard as well, and just finishing up with the I Am Discourses by Saint Germain's
Yeah.
writings that are pretty profound.
Oh,
Again,
yeah.
very different than everything that I believed up to this point in my life, and I admire you that you started questioning a lot earlier than I did. Grateful for that and for the people whose lives will be touched and changed as a result. Thank you for being with me today, Logan. I so
Yes. Thank you
appreciate
again for having me on. It's been wonderful. Great conversation.
Yes, and I want ask Daniel if you'll put up Logan's information on how you can reach Logan. So Logan's website is www.loganbarone, LOGANBARONE.com, and his social media links, you can get most of them, I think, from his website, but it's at Logan Barone for YouTube, and Facebook is logan.barone.75. Twitter, Logan Barone 7. Instagram, Logan Barone 7 /. I'm not going to even attempt to read TikTok or the Patreon links, but
Yeah.
they are here, and we'll get them on my page as well in a comment. There's 2 books. Logan has written a book called The Mystery in You, as I mentioned earlier. It's a wonderful book. It's available on Amazon, and he's also co-authored a book called Free to Give. Both of those books are showing up for you right there on this link, and if you are listening by, podcast, you're not obviously not seeing these links here, but you could go to, my webpage to get to this video. My webpage, if you wanna go ahead and put that up, is theawakencollective.org, and you can get all my social media, my email. I am also a spiritual life coach, and if you wanna reach out, I would love that, and you could have a free half-hour call just to see if it's something that you're interested in. A couple of the smaller books I've written are out there, and also all the books that I'm currently reading or have read that have impacted my life. I would love for you to get copies of those as well. Logan, there's something that we say in AA, that the program is about attraction rather than promotion. So I just want to thank you for having a message that is so attractive and recognizable to the human soul that is awakening and remembering where it came from. And folks, I would highly encourage you to follow this guy on social media. I do, and I will continue to do so as we evolve together on this journey. Thank you to Daniel Anderson and Audio Alchemy Productions. As always, Danny, thank you. And thanks for being with us here today. I know this was a lot, but let it sit with you. Contemplate on it. Ask the questions. Until next time, my friends, love and kindness, always.